Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Pumped On Property Show. Today, we've got one of our favourite clients, Demelza, come in to tell us a bit about your story. It's been a hell of a 5 years for you. You've done a lot of values and goals and stuff have changed in life, and we've fortunately become a nice part of that journey as well to try and build out the property portfolio. So thank you so much for coming on today. I'm really excited to get stuck into it. I guess first things first, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you do? Let's start there.
Wow, always a big question. So I'm originally from New Zealand and made the move over to Sydney about 8 years ago.
Yeah, nice.
And actually had a plan at the time to go into law.
Yeah.
So was a lawyer by trade and was planning to get involved in law, and I actually ended up falling into a sales job, which has taken me sort of all around Australia. So I've been in Sydney and to Melbourne, and then more recently, really excitingly, moved up to the Sunshine Coast, which has been awesome to be with you guys up here.
Obviously, you're super fresh up here, so you haven't, got that experience yet, but the two big cities versus the small regional town, like where's your... What's the best city in Australia? Let's get the competition going.
I mean, I have to say I've never been happier up here.
Yeah, nice.
I love cities. But, the times that I was in those cities, they really served me.
Yeah.
It was, a lot of fun.
Yeah, that stage of life, a bit more to do, right?
But coming up here, I think, what sort of grounds me is the beach, ocean, and sort of nature, and you get a lot of that sort of living in the heartland of Sydney or Melbourne. So it's been nice just to come back and sort of take a step back and just slow down.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's so nice to have you up here, and obviously you've moved up with your partner James as well. You guys have been quite passionate about investing, not just in property, but building a share portfolio, and maybe the future holds some business and things like that for both of you as well. So, how's that journey through life, like being, quite a type A, ambitious, forward-thinking kind of person? Like, how has that shaped the person that you are today?
Wow, I think from like an investment standpoint, I've been really fortunate to grow up in a family who have been super open about investing, and, like my nana had properties, my parents have had properties, and they've always been involved in shares. But I think, so like going through my career, and as I started to, get a bit more money and wasn't sort of sure what to do with it, I think it was quite hard almost being a female as well. There's not a lot of advice or guidance, and there's definitely a bigger fear. Like I was always risk adverse, terrified of kind of
losing what you've built.
Losing what I'd built, and so I was just sitting with this money, which is where I started to get involved in shares.
Yeah. So was that the first thing? So it started with shares in the beginning. That was something that, was closer to home for you, with your family being into it a little bit. But how did that journey start, with learning about investing, learning about, building wealth and getting your money working for you? Was there some books that you read in the beginning, or was there some mentors that you had in your life that helped frame your strategy or your understanding or your confidence with investing and changing from that sort of more maybe a fear-based mindset of that old school way of like, save your way to financial freedom, buy a house, get a good job, the white picket fence, all of that stuff. Tell me a little bit more about that beginning of the journey and what gave you the confidence that you now have to be a much more sophisticated and experienced investor.
Yeah, I definitely think it's been quite a slow journey. I'd love to say I picked up a book and, I read this book and it changed my life, but I was actually out for a walk with a friend in Sydney. And she told me about Acorn.
Okay.
So, she was involved in Acorn, and it was this, I looked into it and I went, oh, this is great. Like, I don't have to do anything. I just can put a bit of money in and that'll invest it for me.
They look after it.
They look after it, and it, felt at the time quite low risk. Didn't really think too much about it, sort of jumped in and did that. But then I was actually another one of your clients, funnily enough, Rory.
Yep.
I was working with Rory, and he was telling me about his property journey and what he was doing with you guys, and he bought his first place. And quite frankly, I thought he was crazy because I grew up in that very much that, you earn your money and then you buy the house that you live in. And that's what I'd sort of, had always been, is you buy your home that you live in first. And then once you've got that paid off, then start looking at that investment journey. And so that's when I started to then look for my own place. Was trying to buy in Sydney. We all know what that market was like. And that's when I think the fear really kicked in for me. So I think my next step was sort of reaching out to Rory.
Yeah.
And then subsequently got onto you guys and your podcasts and talking to you. And that's when I think I then started to go, oh, hold up. Maybe what I know and have been told is wrong.
And how, now that you're sort of 3 years, 4 years down the line from that point, do you feel as though that is a reality now, that like there is a different way of doing things and we don't have to follow the model that we were taught in school and from most of our parents?
I mean, everyone's got a different journey, but I personally think it's, for me and like what I'm doing, it's the best model. Especially in, when you look at your Sydneys and your Melbournes, you can't always live and like live where you can afford to buy. And so you end up sort of stuck in this loop-de-loop of you want to own your own home, but you can't afford to live or buy where you want to live. And then if you start looking at investing and looking at the markets and going, actually, I can afford to buy homes here, here, and here, I can have the best of both worlds. I can live where I want to live at the time, but also invest money and start to see that capital growth.
And I think like what happened, because you were living in Sydney, you were living in the city, you wanted to obviously maintain that lifestyle, and you're looking at properties, and because the prices are so high and rental yields are quite low, it's so much more affordable to rent than it is to own in those markets. And then you start learning this idea of timing and cycles, and that there's good times to buy in certain markets, there's bad times to buy in certain markets. So starting to understand those different things, obviously, adds another level and another layer of complexity to those decisions. But obviously having a bit more of a preference for shares in the beginning, but then transitioning more into property. Can you try and explain that journey a little bit as well? And, what sort of got you a bit more excited? Was it conversations with Rory? Was it conversations with us? What sort of was the penny drop moment where you're like, okay, well, this is the right path forward for me? Yeah,
so I think I got to a point where I had this deposit. And I knew that I needed to buy something. Not needed to, but I really wanted to get into the market. So I started looking in Sydney, and I was going to all these open homes, and I think I still will never forget one of the first ones I went to. The real estate agent asked me where my partner was. At the time I wasn't with James and I was single, and I said, oh, no, I'm just looking, to buy on my own. And they looked at me and they said, oh, you're such a brave girl. And that's always
little do they know.
That's always stuck with me though, because it's just the attitude towards females and investing as well. That, if it was just a man, it's like, get in there, buy a property. But for females, we've got to be brave, and it's such a big leap for us. But anyway, I digress. So I was looking around. No,
I think it's important to talk to that, because I think there's so many people out there that are, have experienced something like that misogyny, that, sexism, and we've got our sister Crystal that's smarter than me and Ben, and our other sister Kylie is far more intelligent than me, Ben, and Crystal, and now Crystal's such a successful business person and investor as well. So for us, it's never been something in the household that we've dealt with, because we've always had very, very powerful women around us, and we've always valued that, but that is not the norm. So I think it's important to talk about that journey and how that impacted your decisions and motivations as well.
I think it definitely, when, suddenly you have people saying, oh, you're so brave. And it wasn't, it was just I sort of talked about it to other people, and they went, oh, well, it's a very brave thing to do. And, it really started to make me nervous. Was I making the right decision? Because everyone was sort of shocked that I would even consider buying a property on my own. And not have, having that goal, it definitely started to rattle my confidence. And then I found, I was going out and I was looking at all these different properties, and what I noticed is there was something wrong with every single property, and I started to talk myself. It's like I wanted to buy a property, but I would talk myself out of every single property. And I think there was that subconsciously, potentially, just that fear of, well, maybe I'm doing the wrong thing because everyone just keeps telling me, you know, how hard it is to own a property, and, you know, how difficult it will be and how my whole life will change, and how I'm just brave for being a female that wants to do it alone.
It was also negative and not like, you know, congratulations for getting yourself into a position to buy and working so hard to build up that deposit and sacrificing your weekends to go to the open for inspections. It's very unfortunate that you had to go through that experience, and I think we all suffer from challenges and adversity, some people more so than others. And I believe in the beginning of most of our journeys, the thing that holds the majority of us back is not having that mentor or coach and not having that community of like-minded people that can support you and motivate you and provide you with a soundboard to, like, you know, positively, like, share some different feedback and association. So, you know, if we start talking a little bit more about those challenges that we all suffer from, what do you feel have been the most prevalent ones for yourself throughout this investment journey so far?
I think there's been a couple, but one, like, I have the most incredible family, and my parents are the most supportive parents ever. And I've always, you know, had a close relationship with them and looked for them for advice. So naturally, when you're talking about finances and as you're growing up, who do you go to? You go to your mum and dad and you talk to them, you know, you look, they've been successful. And I was like, I just assumed that the advice that they give me would be the right advice for me.
Of course. It has been up until that point in time, right?
Like, and I think just like their advice is they grew up in a generation where you did, as I mentioned before, like you buy a home and you move into that home and you live in that home. So one of the first challenges I had was actually completely going against everything that they had taught me, the way that, you know, I'd been brought up, and sort of my whole mindset. I had to not only change my mindset, but also the people around me and get them to understand why maybe my journey was going to be a little bit different. So I think that was like a really big barrier.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, when it comes to having that support from your family, like, they are just trying to love you. And they're just projecting their love to you, and sometimes that comes in like a controlling or like a blanketing way, where it's like, you know, your progression in life and you stepping into that next phase of life is super overwhelming for them, and they don't want to see you get hurt. They've probably got experiences of friends that may have been burnt through property from buying in the wrong markets at the wrong time and things like that. So it's sort of a situation where it's coming from and like, I don't mean to say it, an unaware mind. Like, they're not aware of the biases that they're projecting onto you, whereas they probably should have just, you know, maybe given you a cuddle and said congrats and like, okay, well, let's plan this out together and let's like start talking about some different ideas and experiences that we've had.
But I suppose like the flip side actually of that is what probably gave me the confidence to do what we did, was in order to try and explain to them and kind of make them understand why I wanted to do what I was going to do.
That confirmation.
I had to learn. So I had to actually learn about why investment properties were the right decision for me, why Brisbane was the right decision for me, and sort of subsequently basically convincing them that it was why it was the right decision. I actually realised for the first time ever I was working on actually convincing myself and giving myself the confidence I needed to make the decision.
I love that. That's so cool. Like, everyone says that it is, you know, teaching other people is the best way to truly learn and ingrain that knowledge. And then, you know, because you don't want to make the wrong decision and you are an analytical person, you obviously are going to dot the I's and cross the T's.
So it was, I think for me that was just so powerful. And then once I kind of got the confidence to buck the trend and sort of go outside, it was fascinating how many people sort of came to say, how do you do that? I want to do that too. And so I think that's just continued to inspire me to learn more. And that's when I started to the book point. That's when I started to pick up the books and go, actually, you know, let's learn more about this. And, you know, Phil J. Anderson, one of your guys' loves, definitely one of mine. He's given me so much confidence to sort of continue on the journey and also to understand, or like when not to fear. Probably is the big one for me, is he's taught me why to not be fearful of markets and to actually understand them. And for me, that's been super powerful.
Absolutely. And with, stumbling across different people like that, it sort of gets you out of your own mind and you start thinking and analysing opportunities from a bit of a different perspective. And it's not from your own emotional biases. It's more from like a logical understanding of the fundamentals of that particular asset class. Yeah. And when you start diving into Phil Anderson's work, to me, it was very logical. Did you sort of feel, as you started to understand his theories or his belief system, like, did you feel as though it was quite logical? It's like, yeah, this makes sense to me. This actually is very logical.
I think it's an amazing piece of work, and not only do you read it and you go, oh, this makes sense, and it's logical, you can actually look at the history. It's not like someone that's got this logical idea and you go, oh, that seems legit. You actually read and then you look at the graphs and you see everything overlaid and you go, okay, it's logical, and it actually happens and it actually plays out in market. And I know, we can never predict the future, but when you go that far back into history and follow it through, you start to go, okay, there really is a strong pattern. Yeah,
like this is the one that has been operating almost like clockwork, 18 and a half years for 350 years in the United Kingdom, for 250 years in the United States, and for 150 years here in Australia. There's not many analysts or economists or property investors or any investors that actually go that far back. Maybe Ray Dalio is the only other person that does that. And it's funny when you start to see the similarities between what Ray talks about and what Phil talks about. They're so different in the way that they communicate it, but they're both sort of in alignment. Like when in 2019, Ray Dalio came out saying that like he feels as though it's getting pretty hot, and he's moving a lot of his investments into cash, and he's just going to sit on the sidelines. That was at the exact same time that Phil was predicting this sort of stuff. And then after the stock market correction in early 2020, both of those guys came back into the market around June 2020 as well. So like they're both onto it. And I guess that's what makes you one of the most successful investors of all time, right? Like being able to understand when things are getting over the top, and then when things are good to get back in as well. So I guess like pulling it all the way back to the beginning. So you started investing in shares, you started looking at buying your first home in Sydney. After a couple of months of going down that journey, you realised that probably wasn't in alignment with your goals or your values. So you started talking to friends, you started listening to the podcasts or the YouTube videos to start learning a little bit more. So when was that moment, or what gave you the confidence, or what helped you decide to not purchase your own home in Sydney, but to focus on investing in property instead? And what was your strategy as well?
I think one of the moments was I was on Instagram or Facebook, I can't remember which one, and Rory had just gone and bought, I think, his second home with you.
Yep.
And he was talking about, the gains that he'd had on his first home and going into the second home. And obviously I'd been following his journey, and he was like, just, if you think I'm analytical, Rory is like the most analytical guy. So I know he's done, his research inside out. And I've been listening to what you guys said, and I kind of just was like, I'm just not going to actually think about this too much. I'm just going to email, and I'm just going to set up an appointment.
Yeah.
Because I'm talking myself out of doing something I want to do. And it just got to the point where I was just going around in a circle. It's like I wanted to buy a property. I was continuing to save to buy a property. And then I was talking myself out of every property I saw.
Okay.
And what I realised is that I actually just needed some help, and I just felt I had a knowledge gap. And unfortunately, real estate agents weren't filling that for me. They were just talking down to me. And
this is a good thing to talk about as well, like at the beginning, because you would assume that the real estate agent is your friend and he wants to help you get the best result as a buyer. But the reality is they're contractually obligated. They've got a fiduciary responsibility to the sellers to help them get the best results. So there's this real contradiction there.
Yeah.
So I guess like the question there is, why did you think that the real estate agent would sort of be able to help you at that point? Do you just sort of feel as though like this is a win-win for everyone, or?
I think it wasn't so much that I thought that they could help me, but it was just the constant condescending nature of them made me consistently doubt myself.
Yeah. And they were the only people that could support you.
And they were the only people that could support me in that sort of that avenue or that journey.
Sure.
And that's when I just realised there has to be a better way.
Yeah.
And I've been sitting on the sidelines watching someone that knew a better way.
Yeah.
And I just hadn't acted.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you decided to book in our conversation, our initial strategy session, where we spent about an hour together just talking through everything, just getting to know one another better. Gave me an opportunity to learn more about your life, your goals, your values, your situation. And we slowly but surely started to plan out that strategy. So talk a little bit more about, that experience and what it was like to start talking about different markets, outside of Sydney or Melbourne that you sort of knew, or New Zealand, and looking up to Brisbane. So what were those initial discussions like? How did you leave those discussions, and how did you feel inside? And then, how did that lead to where you are?
I think a lot of the sort of realizations I've talked about having today came out of that discussion. So, when I first caught up with Pumped, there was, you asked so many questions about, like, if I had the money, why hadn't I bought? And I think that's when I suddenly went, oh my God, this is what's happened. And I also realized I didn't have a strategy. I didn't really have a plan. I just had this, like, buy a house because it's just like the logical thing, to do. And I think so, like, coming off that call, I was like, oh, there's actually, like, you can build out a strategy.
Yeah.
And that you can actually work towards, what financial freedom means for you. And I think that was the other thing that came out, is that financial freedom means something different for everyone. So we worked through, like, what did financial freedom mean for me?
Yeah.
And it really made me think about what I actually wanted in life. It's not to get rich or have a bunch of money. I wanted to be able to have choices.
Yeah.
And so I think, like, after coming off that call, I went, oh my goodness, like, there is a different way to invest in property that with the right strategy, I can actually get to where I want to be in life. And then also made me think, like, where do I want to be in life? Like, what are my goals? So for me, it was like the most eye-opening hour. Oh,
that's awesome to hear. And I think it's like, this is why you need mentors and support, because you need somebody to get you out of your mind and start thinking differently.
Yeah.
And, when you can start thinking about, what does financial freedom mean to me, like, people don't actually put themselves in the shoes of themselves in 15 or 20 years from now and actually have an objective think about what they want their lifestyle to look like. And for most of us, it's as simple as that, just having choices to be able to do what we want when we want. And that doesn't mean that you need a crazy exorbitant amount of properties or money in the stock market. It just means that you have to sit down and analyse the market and slowly but surely chip away at it. So finding that confidence and then taking action.
Yeah.
So you did it. Like, you got into the market. First one was early 2021?
Yes.
Early
2021. I think we settled sort of mid.
Yeah. So really, really convenient timing. It was a pretty hot market at the time.
It was.
But talk through that experience as well, as to what it was like to start building out the real strategy. Obviously at the beginning in those free conversations, it is relatively high level, but then we get into the nuts and bolts and we start, putting pen to paper and start identifying markets, suburbs, property types, purchase prices. We start educating you a little bit deeper. What was that experience like when, we sort of peek behind the curtain? It's no longer just buying a house. It's like, here's all of the data to help you make that decision.
I think for me, it took away, like, I'd always sort of spoken to this fear of kind of making the leap, and I started to find everything that was wrong with the property. And sort of going through this process, I got to understand the suburbs. I, understood what was happening in those suburbs, where the growth was coming from. And what happened is it just made me so confident in the decision, because I could not like it was something tangible. Like it wasn't now just this idea. It was like, okay, here are suburbs that we're looking at. Here is like I had my purchase price that I'd worked through, and I think for me it became less emotional as well, because I wasn't looking for this home to live in and this thing that was my forever home. Or I suddenly was like, this is a business decision. This is like buying shares.
Love that.
And I think that was probably the massive realization I had, was that I need to take emotion out of it, because when I'm investing in the stock market, I don't invest because I'm like super passionate or in love with a stock. I like the fundamentals and it makes sense on a chart. And that's sort of where that you guys sort of got me to, is actually this is a business decision.
Yeah.
And that when making a business decision, you understand what you're doing, but you also have to take action.
Yeah. And that aligned really well with your personality type and your decision-making process as well, because, as soon as you committed, like I haven't seen many people in my life that have been so dedicated and action oriented to going out there and making their dreams a reality, because you bought that first property and then in quick succession moved into that second property while still building that portfolio. So how did that feel in yourself, like making the decision and then committing and expanding that portfolio? What was it? It was 2 properties in about 6 to 8 months.
6 to 8 months, yeah. I think the first property was scary.
Yeah.
I actually, once I remember, like we'd looked at the property, I'd seen everything. I almost didn't look at it again. Like I trusted you guys. You were like, this is the right property on the right block of land in the right suburb. And I just went, okay, let's do it. Put an offer, okay, let's do it. And I almost didn't overanalyze this. I just, I jumped in.
That worked out.
It did. It really did. It really did work out. And I think once I'd taken that step, all of a sudden, buying property was no longer scary.
No.
It was fun.
And an opportunity.
It made sense. And I think during this time I'd met James as well. So the first property I was adamant I was doing on my own.
Great.
I wanted, this was like, it was mine, it was my journey, and I was 100% like, the next one was also meant to be on my own, but a little thing called serviceability.
Yeah, right. It comes up.
Came into play, and that's when I started to bring James on the journey as well, and he had not really been investing at all.
No.
Never really thought about buying
sort of
a
where
property.
you were 18 months before.
Yeah, like had never actually even sort of thought about buying a property, and so I actually got to start the whole journey again with someone and bring him through the journey and introduce him to you guys and why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then, for us it was amazing as well, because we got to, as a couple, have those conversations some couples just don't have, like sit down, what are our goals? What are our financial, like where do we want to be financially? It was this incredible, actually just unlocked for us as well, like some really sticky conversations.
Yeah, it's important to have them though, right? You need to be on the same page because unfortunately money rules the world, and finances are the number one thing that put more pressure on relationships. So you need to be on the same page, and people have such different upbringings. You being from New Zealand, James being from the United Kingdom, very different upbringings, very different goals in life and things like that. Well, maybe not so much, but then you align on those really important aspects of life, and then that builds a much better relationship and a much better foundation to build your relationship off as well.
Oh.
Did you find that happened with you and James as well?
100%, because I think we unlocked so many different conversations. We suddenly had to have really strong conversations about finances, budgeting, where we want to be, and then it was, buying a property jointly. You then have to have some really open, honest conversations about who owns what. It could bring in lawyers and start to. So I think what it did is build a really strong foundation of trust for us, but also I got to explain what my journey was and say, this is what I want to do. And he obviously, we're still together, so he's very much excited about, that journey as well. But I think it was just, bringing someone else in on that journey and just aligning to what you both wanted. Yeah. And I think it almost got me more excited because, the first property, he was a bit nervous as well, like it's a big, it's still a big commitment.
Absolutely.
But now, every other day we're like, right, we know we're looking for another property now. We ideally want to have, 5 as sort of what we want to get to, possibly 6.
Awesome.
And so I think for us, it's just given us such a strong goal as a couple as well that, we're saving for the same thing. We're both steering towards the same goals.
Yeah, I love that so much. So, you mentioned a little bit about what's next there, but I'd love to get into the nuts and bolts of what that looks like, because you guys timed the Brisbane market extraordinarily well, and you've already generated some amazing short-term growth there, but there's a much higher ceiling in the long-term future. So what is your plan moving forward now with your investment portfolio?
Amazing. So we've got the 2 properties at the moment in Brisbane. Super, as you mentioned, super happy with how they're going. I mean, the first one had a little bit longer, so we've got to realise some pretty incredible capital growth off the back of that. And the second property we bought, we've had just over 6 months, and even that has it's been insane watching what that market's doing in this small suburb.
Yeah, apparently there's a property crash going on.
And the property crash.
You've made like 150K in equity in 6 months.
Yeah, about that, which is, so I'm all for the property crash, as everyone calls it, because our goal is now to get our 3rd property.
Yeah.
So the goal for this one's a little bit different. So the other 2 very much are 100% investment, and we're renting those out, have an amazing agency looking after everything for us. But this next one will be a long-term investment property, but we're actually going to move into it initially.
Nice.
So we've been up on the sunny coast 8 months.
Yeah.
About 8 months now, and we've been renting, and we figured out where we like and what areas we sort of want to be in, and obviously what areas had that growth.
Yeah.
Just happen to be the same places, which is nice. So we're looking to purchase in the next, hopefully, sort of 3-4 months.
Yeah.
And sort of similar to what you've done yourself is move in, do some upgrades.
Do a little bit of reno.
Sort of increase that value and hold that until we are in a position to sort of buy the next sort of more the more forever home.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that stepping stone for us. But
and it's leveraging off the market as opposed to having to hustle. Like a lot of friends, and tell me if you've had these experiences as well, but they try to buy their dream home for their first property, and that's quite unrealistic, because when you're in your late 20s, early 30s, when a lot of Australians or people living in Australia are thinking about buying their first home, there's no chance that that's ever going to be that dream home unless you're in a very fortunate position. But then do you feel as though it's taken a bit of pressure off sort of switching that mindset to going, well, this is just a stepping stone that will improve my long-term financial position and make my journey to my dream home a bit easier?
100%. I mean, we've got some friends who have bought in Sydney and what, they would have deemed their maybe dream location, not dream home. And with interest rates going where they're going, we're watching everyone sweat because they, maxed out their serviceability. They bought, at that maximum level, and watching them actually go through the fair is now, it's quite confronting.
And that's a non-income producing...
It's a non-income, so it's their home, Yeah,
in Robert Kiyosaki's eyes, he calls your home a liability. And, for you and James going out there and timing the Brisbane market well and getting tenants in there to pay for the vast majority of your mortgage, if not all of it, it's a lot more comforting. But then you go and you have a, $1.2 million mortgage with a non-income producing home that you live in. It's, it makes it very challenging to then step up to that next level and start investing, because if you're flat stick just trying to, pay your mortgage on your own home, there's no ability to start thinking about what's next, because you're just in that fear-based mindset. And they say this is a real problem in third world nations, where people are just struggling to get clean drinking water, food on the table. And it's like, when you're in that mindset, you've got no ability to start thinking about other people or other things. You're just kind of surviving, not thriving. But nobody actually thinks about that down the line impact, because all we're told is save up and buy a home. Rather than going and, getting some investments that other people pay for your mortgage.
Save up and have someone else pay for your home.
Do those properties like cost you much money that you're holding at the moment?
No, so we've got them very negatively geared at the moment.
Sure.
Like it's very minor negative gearing.
Okay.
And that's obviously tactical decisions as well.
Yeah, sure.
In some respects, but we are in a position where we are really fortunate that we fixed our interest rates at the exact time. Again, just understanding the market and knowing at what point is a really, good time to fix those mortgages. So we've done that, and they'll sort of look to come off are fixed as we should see the decline in interest rates.
Oh,
so
perfect timing.
We've timed that quite well. So we're in a position where we've got security for the next couple of years. We know exactly, what our repayments are going to be, and the rents are just going up and up. So I think for us, we've been quite fortunate that in one of the properties we have someone who's not, in the most incredible financial situation, and we've actually been able to make the decision to keep them there and not increase their rent, because we're in a position that actually we're covering exactly
beneficial for you,
exactly what we need to. But we're also giving back and actually helping.
How nice is that?
Like helping them out. So
that's something that people don't take into consideration when investing in property as well. Like, you and James are very fortunate to be in your financial position. Yes, you've worked your asses off to get there, but still you are fortunate to have that reality. And, not everybody gets that. And in periods of inflation and when we are seeing the cost of living going up, fortunately, it doesn't actually affect people like me and Tay and you and James and Ben and Lisa. It actually impacts the lower socioeconomic demographics in Australia, and they're forced to pay higher utilities, higher petrol, higher rent, and all of these things, really affect their ability to save and, work towards the dream of buying their own home in the future. So if you can realise that you're providing accommodation for a family, like that's a beautiful thing to be able to do.
Yeah, and I think like even when, we first caught up, I said, it's not like I don't want to make all this money for myself. It's I want to be in a position to be able to give back, and I wouldn't be living my own values if then I was put in a position where I could actually give back and I chose not to.
Yeah.
So, I think I'm super fortunate, and that kind of leads into, the third property.
Yep.
Is we don't want to get into a position where we financially can't make those decisions to continue to give back, which is why instead of buying that, dream home that we could potentially afford to do, we're saying actually we want to, make another really sensible investment decision, because while property's, one of our goals, we've got other things we want to achieve, and we don't want to end up in a position where we're, resent our properties because they prevent us being able to do the other things, achieve our other goals that we have.
That's an amazing thing, and we always advocate creating an investment strategy that's in alignment with your lifestyle, your values and your goals, because you don't want this thing that is just like this looming dark cloud over your head that's constantly causing you stress and anxiety. You want something that's like motivating and exciting, and you're happy to be a part of that journey, because pushing up a rock up a hill for 15, 20 years is bloody hard.
Yeah.
But if you're just, smooth sailing, it makes it a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And also we want to be able to continue to save because we want to get the next property. James is very passionate about shares, so shares is probably, James.
It's good to have the balance though.
And he does so much research, and, it's like kind of you sit on the couch at our house at night and James is like, hey, check out this company, look at this. And I'm sitting there being like, look at this house. And he's like, no, we're not. That's not part of the goal right now. And I'm like, but look, the suburb in Brisbane. So, we've kind of offset each other quite well in our goals. But we want to be able to continue, to invest in stocks, because we know long term how powerful that's going to be for us financially, and the same with property. So it's just finding that balance, because you don't have to buy the most expensive house.
It's cool to have that positive competition in the house as well. It's like, well, who's going to win?
No, it absolutely is. And I think shares are, definitely a little bit of a game for us as well. We'll both bet on which company's going to do what, and we keep it fun, but it's still that underlying message for us is long-term
fundamentals.
Fundamentals, but when we want options, but we're going to have fun doing it.
Absolutely.
We're all going to make mistakes, right?
Yeah, and that's why it's so amazing to work with people like you and James, because, you know, you guys are very lifestyle oriented. Yeah, you're ambitious. Yeah, you want to achieve, you know, really substantial financial goals, but, you know, you want to enjoy that process. You want to help other people. You want to give back, and you want to have a meaningful impact for, you know, people that you come in contact with in your life, which is an amazing thing. It's less about you and it's more about this like beautiful balance of life.
Yeah, we only get to do it once, right? So
that's all we know about. So I guess to close off today's podcast, you know, if you had the opportunity to talk to your younger self, you know, what advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know today?
I think a couple of things, but I mean, one of probably the biggest things for me is don't just take advice from those that are directly surrounding you, because everyone has their own upbringing, their own opinions and their own ideals, and they've got their own inherent bias. So if you're looking to make decisions, you know, be it investing or anything, look outside and actually lean into some of the experts, and not just one. Because, you know, if you look at currently in the market, right, like they would, you know, experts are telling you it's doom and gloom, so do your research and find mentors and people who have done what you want to do.
Love that.
And learn from them, because I think, you know, what did hold me back is the people in my life had the best intentions for me, but they also didn't necessarily know the information I needed them to know, which then created that fear in me, and I just stalled.
No, I couldn't agree more with that, you know, in the sense that we're all human beings. Yeah. We're all living the same but different experiences. We're all just trying to figure it out. Yeah. But when you're younger, and I am still bloody young, so are you, and, you know, I do put people on pedestals. Well, I certainly have in the past, but, you know, it's just about breaking those things down and just not comparing yourself to other people, and not like putting people on a pedestal, and just finding that right advice, because we are all just trying to figure out this crazy life, right?
Oh, 100%. I think, you know, when you're younger, you think people of our age have it all figured out. Yeah. And you realise, no, we're all just coasting through trying to learn.
We're a little pinball in a pinball machine just getting smacked around.
Something like that.
Awesome, Dan. Well, thank you so much for coming on to today's podcast. I really do appreciate it. Hopefully you've been able to motivate some other people that have been on a similar journey of life to you, and you know, it'd be exciting to get you back on here in a couple of years or something once you've, you know, purchased property number 3 and maybe working towards property number 4, see what happens, and just keep living this good life and see what happens. But yeah, much appreciated. Thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
No worries.
That's a wrap. That's a wrap.
That's cool, bro. Yeah.
Oh, sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good. That's so nice. Oh.